Welcome back to CIA Declassified. Imagine a humid night in the Mekong Delta. The air is thick enough to chew, smelling of stagnant swamp water, rotting vegetation, and the sharp metallic tang of spent cordite. Somewhere in the distance, a village is burning, casting a flickering orange glow against the canopy, but there are no sirens. Only the rhythmic mechanical pulse of a Huey orbiting overhead like a hungry bird of prey. In the shadows below, men without faces or names are tracking a target through the knee-deep mud, their movements practiced, cold, and final. They are ghosts in the machine of a war that refuses to stay within the lines of a map. To understand KUWOLF, you have to step into this paranoid, sweat-soaked atmosphere of the late 1960s and early 1970s. This was an era where the domino theory was no longer just a theoretical exercise for men in suits at the Pentagon. It was a bloody, daily reality played out in the tall grass. From the treacherous riverine networks of Southeast Asia to the jagged volcanic highlands of Honduras, small, highly mobile insurgent groups were paralyzing pro-Western governments with death by 1,000 cuts tactics. These rebels didn't fight fair. They disappeared into the civilian population and struck when the sun went down. The standard military response? Massive take columns and carpet bombing. Was too slow, too loud, and far too heavy to catch a ghost. The agency realized that to kill a shadow, you had to become one. They needed a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. This realization birthed the gray zone, a terrifying space where the line between peace and war was permanently blurred and where the moral high ground was often sacrificed for operational necessity. This was the laboratory of KUWOLF, where the agency began to manufacture its own brand of wolf to protect the flock. The designation KUWOLF was not chosen by accident, but according to the agency's internal logic. In the CIA's cryptonym system, the KU diagraph was the functional code assigned to the Office of Training and Specific Instructional or Operational Doctrine projects. The wolf suffix was a sterile descriptor chosen to evoke the predatory pack-based tactics of the units the project aimed to create. Unlike earlier projects that focused on gathering data, KUWOLF was about active elimination. It was a policy of aggressive counter-infiltration, teaching local units how to track, corner, and neutralize insurgents in their own backyard. We are pulling the mask off the night hunters. Here is the cold, hard inventory of the agency's counterinsurgency doctrine. KUWOLF established specialized training centers in Saigon to train the provincial reconnaissance units. The project prioritized neutralization of the Viet Cong infrastructure through surgical strikes. Records show the CIA used KUWOLF to implement the search and seize methodology in rural hamlets. The agency deployed mobile training teams to Latin America to replicate Southeast Asian tactics. Documentation confirms that KUWOLF units were instructed to remain completely sterile, wearing no dog tags or identifying uniforms. KUWOLF operatives used the pseudo-gang tactic, where elite units posed as insurgents to infiltrate enemy camps. The project developed the stay-behind network doctrine for areas expected to fall to insurgent control. The CIA funded the creation of rural security committees to identify local insurgent sympathizers. Records verify that KUWOLF units utilized high-speed, low-profile patrol boats for riverine interdiction missions. Internal audits reveal the CIA operated a network of interrogation centers managed under the KUWOLF operational umbrella. The project recruited former insurgents, Chi Hoi, or open arms defectors, to serve as scouts for hunter-killer teams. Documentation shows the agency used KUWOLF to develop night vision operational protocols for jungle warfare. Records confirm that KUWOLF trained units were involved in the capture of high-value targets in the Central Highlands. The project utilized psychological operations to broadcast the names of wanted insurgents over village loudspeakers. The CIA provided non-deterministic weapon systems, unmarked rifles and explosives to KUWOLF units to maintain deniability. Records show the project funded the use of Air America for the clandestine extraction of captured personnel. The agency implemented census grievance programs to collect intelligence under the guise of social work. Documentation confirms that KUWOLF units utilize snatch and grab tactics for high-priority intelligence gathering. Records verify that the project used indigenous leader training to build self-sustaining local defense forces. The CIA operated secret training camps for KUWOLF in the Florida Everglades to simulate tropical environments. Records show the project utilized aerial reconnaissance from high-altitude U-2 flights to map insurgent supply lines. The project created special interrogation teams to process defectors in real time in the battlefield. Documentation shows KUWOLF influenced the tactics used by the Honduran 316 Battalion. The agency utilized hidden cache systems to supply long-range reconnaissance patrols in enemy territory. Records confirm that KUWOLF provided the blueprint for targeted-attrition programs across 3 continents. The project maintained a master target list of regional insurgent leaders for prioritized elimination. Internal memos confirm that KUWOLF used civil affairs teams to distribute medical supplies as a cover for spotting missions. The project provided the funding for the National Police Field Force in various client states. Documentation shows the agency used KUWOLF to track the flow of Soviet-made small arms through neutral ports. The project operated a secret signal intelligence center in Thailand to intercept insurgent radio traffic. KUWOLF pioneered the black box funding method to hide operational costs within non-operational budgets. Records indicate KUWOLF units were trained in non-linear tracking to evade capture in dense canopy. The agency used KUWOLF to identify and recruit potential political leaders within captive populations. Documentation proves the use of acoustic seismic sensors to monitor jungle trails under the KUWOLF umbrella. The project conducted surreptitious entry, training for local police forces to plant bugging devices. Records confirm the development of the LPRP, long-range patrol rations, specifically for KUWOLF sustained operations. KUWOLF integrated civilian self-defense groups into the larger intelligence gathering architecture. The project funded the publication of anti-insurgent manuals in over 12 local dialects. A quote from William Colby, former CIA director and architect of the Phoenix program: "We weren't there to hold territory. We were there to dismantle the human architecture of the enemy's revolution." A quote. That's a pretty good one, isn't it? William Colby. Okay, a quote from Theodore Shackley, former CIA station chief: "The best way to hunt a wolf is to think like a wolf, and that is exactly what we taught them." A quote from a declassified internal KUWOLF tactical briefing: "In the gray zone, the difference between a civilian and a combatant is often just a matter of who sees who first." A quote from Donald Jameson, CIA senior officer: "Operational success was measured by the number of empty chairs at the enemy's table." A quote from Thomas Wolfe, he's an author whose name inadvertently echoes the project's predatory designation: "Fiction is not fact, but fiction is fact selected and understood. Fiction is fact arranged and charged with purpose." A quote from a declassified internal CIA training manual dated 1969: "The counter-insurgent must be more than a soldier. He must be a social architect and a surgeon of shadows." And this is a quote that is attributed to a redacted CIA case officer. The name is blocked out. "You cannot fight a shadow with a spotlight. You must step into the dark and find its source." And here's the last one for you from a declassified field report from the provincial reconnaissance units: "We created a culture of the hunter where the only rule was that the prey never saw the strike coming." End quote. The most sensitive files of the KUWOLF project remain heavily redacted under FOIA exemptions B1, B3, and B7, subsection C. While B1 covers national security and B7 subsection C protects personal privacy, B3 is the internal statute exemption that protects information specifically exempted from disclosure by other laws, such as the identities of undercover officers or specific intelligence methods. What does this likely mean? Da-da-da-da. These redactions almost certainly hide the operational kill logs and the specific names of foreign nationals who were recruited to perform extrajudicial neutralizations on behalf of the agency. My theory is that the CIA maintains these redactions because the individuals involved in KUWOLF units, many of whom were former insurgents themselves, went on to hold high-ranking positions in their respective governments after the Cold War. Revealing their participation in hunter-killer teams would not only destroy their political careers, but would likely trigger international war crimes investigations that would lead directly back to American involvement in targeted killings during supposedly peacetime operations. Specifically, these files likely contain the site-specific evidence of where these units operated within neutral nations, which would prove the agency systematically violated the sovereignty of dozens of countries. The B3 exemption is likely hiding the exact chemical formulas or acoustic frequencies used during enhanced interrogation sessions that were too experimental for the general public to ever know about. When the hunters operate in total darkness, the rumors are the only light. For instance, there's the synthetic insurgency theory. Some speculate that KUWOLF units didn't just pose as insurgents, but actually triggered violent events in local villages to justify the implementation of martial law. This would allow the agency to handpick the regional strongmen who would be most compliant with American interest under the guise of restoring order. By manufacturing the very chaos they were sent to fix, the CIA could ensure a permanent state of emergency that required their continued funding and presence. This would essentially make the entire conflict a self-fulfilling prophecy designed to keep the defense budget overflowing and the agency's power unchecked. The biological tracker speculation. This is a theory that the CIA used KUWOLF-sponsored medical clinics to inject radioactive isotopes or early biomarkers into village populations to track their movements via specialized sensors. This theory suggests that the agency viewed the local population as a living sensor network, allowing them to map the social infection of insurgency through the physical movement of people through the jungle. If true, it would mean that thousands of civilians were turned into unwitting beacons for airstrikes, effectively making their very bodies a part of the battlefield infrastructure. Then there's the deep state seed theory. Speculation persists that KUWOLF was never actually shut down, but was instead privatized into international security firms to continue targeted attrition for corporate interests. By moving the doctrine into the private sector, the agency could maintain its gray zone capabilities without any of the congressional oversight or public accountability that follows government operations. This would mean that the private military companies of today are essentially the externalized remnants of the original KUWOLF program, acting as the invisible enforcers for global capital. Then there's the acoustic torture experiment. It's a persistent theory which suggests that KUWOLF-trained units utilized high-frequency sound emitters disguised as insects to induce psychological distress and sleep deprivation in insurgent camps. Proponents of this theory point to the unusual number of mass desertions where insurgents surrendered in a state of extreme neurological exhaustion despite having ample supplies and no physical injuries. These ghost frequencies would be the ultimate weapon of the gray zone, attacking the mind directly without leaving a single physical mark for a doctor to find. And then, of course, there's the Manchurian Scout conspiracy. Some believe that KUWOLF utilized early behavior modification techniques on captured insurgents to turn them into unconscious agents who would lead hunter-killer teams back to their commanders. This speculation holds that these scouts weren't defectors at all, but were reprogrammed through pharmacological and psychological trauma to serve as living homing beacons for the agency. Their loyalty wasn't a choice, but a chemical compulsion, making them the ultimate infiltrator because even they didn't know they were betraying their own cause. And lastly, there is the weather warfare sub-project theory. It's a fringe theory that KUWOLF experimented with silver iodide seeding to extend the monsoon season in specific insurgent-controlled valleys, making their logistics impossible and forcing them into the open. This would use the very climate of the region as a biological weapon, starving out resistance by simply making it rain for months on end without a break. Was KUWOLF a success? Tactically, it was a lethal refinement of unconventional warfare. The agency successfully proved that small indigenous units could effectively dismantle insurgent infrastructures that had baffled conventional armies for years. Tactically, the hunter-killer model was highly effective. It forced the enemy to divert massive resources to internal security and broke the mystique of invisibility that insurgent groups relied upon. By turning the insurgents' own tactics against them, KUWOLF created a psychological fragility within the enemy ranks that often led to total organizational collapse. The tactical win was in the economy of force, achieving massive results with a handful of highly trained specialists. Every mission was a surgical strike designed to sever the brain of the insurgency from its body. This decapitation strategy became the gold standard for how a small force can neutralize a significantly larger, more entrenched opponent. Strategically, it was a double-edged sword of stability. While KUWOLF succeeded in many regions at suppressing communist insurgencies, it often did so by empowering regional warlords and unaccountable paramilitary groups. Strategically, this created a legacy of brutality that damaged America's long-term moral standing and often led to blowback as these trained units eventually turned their skills against their own populations or the United States itself. The strategic legacy of KUWOLF is the securitization of the globe. The idea that every corner of the world is a potential battlefield where the rules of war are secondary to the goal of containment. It achieved short-term stability at the cost of long-term democratic integrity, creating a shadow architecture of power that persists in many former client states to this day. We won the battle for the jungle, but we may have lost the war for the soul of international law. As far as operational and technological breakthroughs go, KUWOLF had quite a few, such as targeted-attrition and HVT mapping. KUWOLF perfected the network analysis approach to warfare, where the goal is to kill the nodes, ledgers, and leaders and logistics, rather than the frontline combatants. This is now the fundamental doctrine of the Joint Special Operations Command and the CIA's global response. It is the scientific basis for modern drone warfare and the kill chain methodology used to neutralize high-value targets in the global counter-terrorism framework. Intelligence analysts use advanced software to map the human terrain and identify the precise moment to strike a node to collapse an entire network. Pseudo-gang and infiltration protocols. The project developed the red teaming of human intelligence, where operatives live and act as the enemy to gather deep cover data. This methodology is now the standard for counterintelligence and counterterrorism divisions worldwide. It is used to infiltrate online radicalization networks and transnational criminal organizations. The military's undercover support units utilize these exact KUWOLF protocols to map the internal dynamics of insurgent cells before launching direct action raids. This social engineering allows agencies to manipulate enemy communications and sow internal discord from within. Sterile force and deniable warfare architecture. KUWOLF pioneered the use of third-party proxies and unmarked equipment to conduct lethal missions without a state fingerprint. This has evolved into the gray zone warfare tactics used by the Special Activities Center. It allows for plausible deniability in paramilitary operations in disputed territories, such as the use of private security contractors or advisor groups to achieve strategic goals without declaring an official state of war. This proxy framework is currently being deployed in regional conflicts across the Middle East and Eastern Europe to project power without risking direct state-on-state confrontation. Mobile real-time interrogation and data processing. The development of forward operating intelligence cells that could process captured data and personnel on the spot to generate actionable intelligence within hours. This is the direct ancestor of the sensitive site exploitation teams used by Army Special Forces and SEAL Team 6. Modern units use handheld biometric scanners and portable satellite uplinks to check fingerprints and facial data against global databases in the middle of a raid. This allows for continuous operational pressure where the intelligence gathered in one raid leads directly to the next target within minutes, a high-tech realization of the KUWOLF style immediate exploitation doctrine. The KUWOLF project proves that in the Shadow War, the hunter doesn't just chase the prey. They learn to breathe the same air. The Night-Stalkers were so effective because they accepted that to defeat an unconventional enemy, you had to abandon the comfort of conventional morality. When we look at the legacy of this project, we see the blueprint for the modern perpetual war, a conflict with no front lines, no clear end, and no identifiable uniforms. The agency proved that the gray zone is not a temporary condition, but a permanent feature of global power. The echoes of KUWOLF are everywhere in our modern security state. We live in a world where the kill list is a bureaucratic reality and deniable action is the preferred tool of diplomacy. The techniques developed in the humid jungles of Southeast Asia have been digitized and globalized. The agency didn't just train hunters. They discovered that fear is the ultimate territorial boundary. By weaponizing that fear, they ensured that the Shadow War would continue long after the Cold War ended. As you look at the news and hear about precision strikes and surgical operations, ask yourself, whose doctrine is pulling the trigger? Who defines who is a target? And most importantly, who watches the hunters in the dark? The Night-Stalkers never left the woods. They just moved into the server rooms and the satellite feeds. This doctrine of active containment has become so normalized that we no longer see the blood on the velvet. We've traded the loud, messy wars of the past for a quiet, efficient, and endless shadow harvest. The wolf isn't at the door anymore. He's in the wiring, he's in the data, and he's in the very air we breathe. The legacy of KUWOLF is the realization that the most effective way to manage the world is to make sure the world never knows it's being managed. Thanks for listening. Keep your eyes on the shadows and your ears on the silence. Always verify your targets, secure your perimeter, and remember, if you hear the jungle stop breathing, the wolf is already behind you. Join us next time as we examine Lionizer, the Caribbean front, the height of the revolution, when the state bans God and the pulpits become the last line of defense, the CIA finds an unlikely ally in the holy halls. We'll uncover the delicate manipulation of Lionizer, the secret project that turned the Cuban Catholic Church into a clandestine hub for resistance and intelligence distribution. It's a story of spiritual infiltration and divine dissent, where the rosary becomes a tool of regime change. Join us next time for The Holy Hearth. In the meantime, I'll see you in the archives.